historian, so my facts don't have to be quite as pristine as those of a historian. I seem to hopefully can get by with it, but I think my facts are pretty good. The Yacht Club has an amazing archive. We've got the same problem that you're talking about. We have no place to store it where we can access it, but and most of it is really history of Gulfport and not just the Yacht Club. We put together this talk 3 years ago when we were celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Yacht Club, and history hasn't changed much since then, so I'm going to use the talk on you all tonight. I'm going to have some notes here. If not, I would spend the whole time on the first slide. So bear with me on that. In 1902, some of Gulfport's best citizens back then who were interested in sailing got together and discussed forming a yacht club. And they said, and I quote, they wanted to establish a club devoted to the interest of boating and fishing. And sure enough, they formed this club, and the first Commodore was who else but Joseph T. Jones. He at that time had a yacht named the Gracie, and he was really very active and interested in the yacht club as everything else. And just 1 year later, the Gulfport Yacht Racing Association, as they named it, became a member of the Southern Gulf Coast Yachting Association. Now that is the predecessor to the Gulf Yachting Association, which we have now, and it is an organization of yacht clubs all along the Gulf Coast. You might be interested, some of you will recognize some of these names, some of you are probably kin to some of these people. The officers of this first group was the Vice Commodore was a John C. Kennedy. The Rear Commodore was a J.R. Pratt. The Secretary was R.W. Shipp. The Treasurer was George P. Hughes. The Fleet Captain was Thomas Favre. And the Fleet Surgeon was Dr. J.B. Kilgore. It worked out very well because Commodore Jones, in building his Great Southern Hotel, built a pavilion out on the East Pier. And because of his involvement with the club, he allotted the club the sole use of this glass pavilion out on East Pier. According to the newsletter of the club at that time, they described this as a two-story frame building on pilings. It had a gallery the length of the building that you can see across the front there. It had three-sided view of the Gulf. It had an upstairs ballroom, smoking and card room, dressing room, gentlemen's quarters that was set aside for judges, timers, and reporters. It was connected to the Great Southern by a mile-long boardwalk. And it also was connected to the Union Station with a trolley track line. The trolley ran regularly out there from Union Station. In 1903, they had their first regatta. According to a newspaper article, the prizes, back then they sailed for prizes rather than trophies. The first prize for vessels over 45 feet was $35, which was quite a sum in 1903. For those under were $30. A newspaper article cited it was the largest crowd that had gathered at one point on the coast. Steamers came from as far as Mobile and New Orleans, bringing spectators for this, and it was kind of like horse racing back then. Spectators bet on the boats involved. This annual regatta was continued, except in 1905 it was canceled because of the yellow fever epidemic in Pass Christian. Then at 11 at night on the 27th of June, 2009, the club burned to the ground. Following this, of course, we had the World War I, the Great Depression, and I can't find anything anywhere about yacht clubs or yachting for the next 25 years. Then, in 1932, a group of sailors decided to get together and start racing their sailboats right off the coast. These included the Alfonso brothers, Leonard Hardy, Jim Todd, G.B. Flagg Sr., Andy Hedderhoff, and Dr. Alva St. Clair Hopkins Sr. What they did was, this is a group of them. There was a Manzy's Fish House and Pier down on the West Pier, and Mr. Manzy was very generous in letting them use his pier to organize before the races. And it was noted that Dr. Joseph Milner, with his yacht, the Sea Wind, made himself available to help out with these races. Then, in 1933, this group got together and built a pier south of Manzy's Pier that they could sail from. And in 1934, on the 17th of September, due to the leadership of these people, the Gulfport Yacht Racing Association was awarded a charter by the state of Mississippi. The stated purpose was to promote aquatic sports, to develop further interest in such sports on the Gulf Coast. And this is the same organization that's known as the Gulfport Yacht Club today, but its official name is the Gulfport Yacht Racing Association. Dues at the time were $2. For this $2, you could participate in their races that happened every weekend, and you were entitled to 2 dances, one on the 4th of July and one on New Year's Eve. They later built a judge's stand, and which was further out, because what they had to do at this time, if they were going to sail in a race, they had to wade out in mud to their boats, get in the boats, and go out to the race course. So they built this judge's stand out there, and people would gather on the judge's stand every weekend to watch the races, because there wasn't much to do in Gulfport back then. So there's an interesting episode where one weekend they had so many people on the stand that it collapsed and sunk. But luckily no one was hurt. This first Commodore in this new club was Dr. Alva Hopkins, and the meetings of the group to get organized and early in their functioning time was in his home on East Beach. But finally the group got so big they had to move the meetings to the Markham Hotel. In 1934, when it got its charter, it was admitted to the Gulf Yachting Association. And their first race that they had as a yacht club had 4 catboats in it. Vince Alfonso with his boat Revenge, G.B. Flagg Sr. with his catboat Carolyn, Ashton Hardy with Star Wind, and Alva Hopkins with Whatnot. The first regatta was held in the summer of 1935, and that started their annual summer regatta, which they had every year, and we still have it. But for the first one, they had 35 boats, and a detailed description of it in the Dixie Guide. As far as local skippers, these boats came from Forest, New Orleans, Pensacola, Mobile, throughout the GYA. Our local sailors in that first regatta were Upton Sisson with the Barbara Jane, Philip Schilling, Bob Heath, and Dick Gay with the Alibi, Todd Alfonso with Crazy Cat, Nathan Alfonso with Amberjack, James Todd with Medable, Alva Hopkins with Betty Jean, and G.B. Flagg with Skipjack. And this is a trophy that was won by Upton Simpson in that very first regatta. It's been through a few hurricanes, as you can see, but we're delighted to still have it in our collection. By the end of the first year, the club had grown to 200 members. And if you look at that roster from then, it looks like they went through downtown Gulfport and twisted every arm down there. Everybody in the town paid their $2 and belonged, and it had nothing to do with their social status or anything else. It was just a bunch of Gulfport people. Then there was a requirement of the Gulf Yachting Association that every club had to own at least 2 fish boats. Now, fish boats was a sloop, 18-foot sloop, that had been designed by Rathbone Dubuis of Dubuis Road family. They spent their summers over here. That's where he honed his interest in sailing. And he developed this boat for the Gulf Yachting Association. Well, we, of course, had no fish boat that first year, but they suspended the rules to allow Gulfport to join anyway. But we did have to get busy and build a fish boat. This is a newspaper article showing the first Gulfport Yacht Club fish boat. We had 3 of them built. They were built right here in Gulfport by C.T. Patterson. I don't know where his shop was, but this shows them his shop when they were being built. We also had another local design and built boat called the Alfonso Racer that was designed and built by Vince Alfonso. He built, we think, about 25 or 26 of them. They played a very important part in the history of sailing in Gulfport. We're very lucky that they were around in the 30s and 40s. We were very lucky 2 years ago, a gentleman from Memphis called and said he had an Alfonso Racer to the Yacht Club, would we be interested in having it? Of course, we were delighted. So far as we know, it's the only remaining one. And we went up to Memphis and got it back and have restored it and have it on display down at the Yacht Club. But this boat was heavily used by the younger sailors at that time. As you can tell, it was a small catboat, a one-man boat, and these youngsters could handle them very well. And that led to the starting of something called the Sandbar Sailing Club. It had existed really from about 1932 to 39. It was a bunch of people that most of them lived from downtown Gulfport to the VA area. And they participated in fishing, crabbing, and raced their boats, mostly Alfonso Racers. I'll run through some names of this group because, again, y'all will probably recognize a lot of them. Billy Eaton, Cummings McCall, Bess Rosenblum, Mary Elizabeth Sweat, Martin Menninger, Mildred Whitehead, Tut and Joe Alfonso, John Scully, Ann Riley, Eleanor Hatton, Neil and Knox White, Rack Edwards, Margaret McWilliams, Stanford and George Moss, Bubba and Son Weatherly, James Edwards, Buddy, Marjorie D., Alva M., and Jean Hopkins, Owen Palmer, Dickie Matthews, Red Stewart, Bobby and Murph Snelling, Ted Reeman, and Faye Baxley. This really developed a core of leadership for later years for the whole Gulfport Yacht Club, so it was very important in our history. While we're talking about the Alfonso Racer, I want to pass this around. This is a trophy called the H.T. Cottom Trophy. Y'all probably remember H.T. Cottom was kind of the Cisco of that time here in Gulfport. Know nothing about why it was made, why the company gave it to the Yacht Club. It's engraved on here, it's sterling silver. And it's engraved on here, it was for Alfonso races. Guy Lewis Jr. won it in 1938 for the first time. It was last won in 1940 by Son Weatherly, and disappeared. No one even knew it existed. And about 3 years ago, it showed up in the Mayor Biloxi's office, and he contacted us, and we were thrilled. It's sterling silver, but I want to pass this around so you can see the detail of the engraving on here. It is the engraving of the pavilion at the Jones Park, and it's quite interesting to see. And after what it's been through, I don't think y'all can do much damage to it. All right. Shortly after the beginning of the Yacht Club, Dr. Hopkins and a group of mostly Yacht Club people decided we desperately needed a small craft harbor. They could hardly have regattas because there was no place for the boats to be protected to tie up even over the weekend. And there again, they had to leave them at anchor and wade out in the mud to the boats. So they started a campaign to build a yacht basin west of Mandy's Pier, kind of in the area where the commercial, what we call the front boat harbor was, before the hurricane. And they went to all the civic clubs, worked on all the politicians. In fact, on the 25th of October, 1935, Upton Sisson gave a talk to the Rotary Club in which he said this small craft harbor concept has been delayed and filibustered almost to the point of exhaustion. But finally, the city fathers agreed to a plan to issue a $10,000 bond issue to build a harbor 8 feet deep that would accommodate 40 boats. However, this was voted down. But it was a blessing because a year later, bids were sent out for $350,000 in a harbor, along with a $1 million building for West Pier and the warehouse. It was funded by the WPA, consisted of small craft harbor, with a paved driveway, large clubhouse, and filled-in park. It's interesting to note, though, according to the paper at that time, 45 Biloxi business and civic leaders got together and threatened to file suit if any seawall tax was used anywhere on the beach in Gulfport. There's no more mention of that, so I assume no seawall tax was used in it. So this project was to get started, but you know how the bureaucracy works. And at the last minutes, they discovered that they had overlooked that there was a condition in there that by the WPA that they had to have proof it was going to create a regular income. So they decided that they would lease to the Yacht Club a portion of the clubhouse for $50 a month. But they discovered that they had to have the lease in hand. And well, there was a regatta going on in Mobile that weekend, and Dr. Hopkins and all his board was in Mobile sailing. So city commissioners, Alvin Ballinger and Joe Beeman, drove to Mobile on Saturday. Dr. Hopkins called a meeting of the board, and they voted to sign this contract. They signed it. They drove it back to Gulfport. They put it in the hands of Senator Pat Harrison, who was to leave on the train the next morning and hand deliver it in Washington and got it there in time for the Jones Park and Harbor to go forward. I will say all this was done with the help of Senators Bilbo and Harrison and Representative Bill Coleman to finalize the funds. Then Dr. Hopkins and the group that had really pushed this decided, for obvious reasons, that the the project should be named for Joseph Jones. And also, of course, he had been dead a number of years then, and so had his son, Joseph Albert Jones. But they campaigned and, with little trouble, were responsible for naming the park the Joseph Jones and the marina, the Burt Jones Marina. And when the project was completed in 1937, and in appreciation for what the club had done towards this, Grace Jones Stewart, the daughter of Joseph Jones, commissioned this trophy, which is the Joseph T. Jones Memorial Trophy, presented it to the Yacht Club as a trustee for the trophy. It was to be sailed in Snipes, the championship, every year. According to the newspaper article, it cost her $15,000. This was in 1937. It's sterling silver, and it had a nice top on it. In fact, I'll show you the picture. As you can see, had a nice top on it and a base. Well, it went through a hurricane. I'm not sure whether it's a 47 Hurricane or Camille. Luckily, we saved this much. You see dents and so forth in it. And just this year, the snipe class has pretty much disappeared here. And it was dedicated for the Charles Galloway Laser Championship, but it's still the Jones Trophy. Well, it was getting time to dedicate the new harbor, and according to the newspaper at the time, 11 civic clubs met at the Chamber of Commerce to plan the dedication of the harbor. It was decided that they needed more than just a speech and a dedication, and because the Yacht Club was so involved, and it was such a wonderful facility, the Gulf Yachting Association, who had their annual championship race once a year, which was called the Lipton Cup Regatta, because it was they sailed for a beautiful trophy that had been given to them for Thomas Lipton and the fish boats. Well, the way it worked was the winner from the previous year was to host the following year. And the GYA felt like this was important enough that they suspended the rules and decided to have the Lipton Regatta in conjunction with the dedication of the harbor. Dr. Hopkins commented to a meeting of the Junior Chamber of Commerce, and this was the way he felt about pushing yachting on the coast. He said, Gulfport should be increasingly water-minded. It's especially essential that boys and girls of the city become interested in sailing and water sports. Well, shortly after, at a meeting in the Gold Room, Gulfport Yacht Club spokesman F.B. Hughes Sr. announced that plans for the dedication of the park and basin were moving quickly. And in the newspaper on Sunday, September 5th, 1937, were the giant headlines, Gulfport again the center of attraction on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. The GYA then consisted of 13 yacht clubs. They all came. We've got in our archives a letter from the Buccaneer Yacht Club of Mobile, kind of an invitation stating that our opening ball will be held on board the club ship Resolute. While our members must wear tuxedo, it is permissible for visiting yachtsmen to attend in informal costume. This is just one example of all the clubs sent their scads of people and big steamers and things for the occasion. In the program, Friday included the dedication of the Gulfport Yacht Club and a rival dance. The invitations were sent out on Malcolm Hotel stationery to a gala on the roof of the Malcolm. That was on Friday night. Then on Saturday, they had the dedication of the park and basin. One of the speakers was Governor Hugh White, senators and congressmen, and of course all the local politicians were in attendance. It started with the grand parade in downtown Gulfport, led by the American Legion Drum and Bugle Corps, and of course the Gulfport High School Band. There were 13 cars, one representing a representative from each yacht club, and they were led by Miss Gulfport Yacht Club, Marjorie D. Hopkins. And an aside on that, in her selection as being Miss Gulfport Yacht Club, it was quite a big deal, and they met in the Gold Room of the Malcolm Hotel to have the election, and it was close as to who was going to win it, and it was very competitive for them. At the end of the ceremonies, Dr. Hopkins was recognized to give the final and shortest speech in which he said, "I declare the Gulfport Yacht Club to be in commission." Then they had the first race, and on Sunday they wound up with a shipwreck party. Of course, they had the second and third races, and regrettably, Biloxi Yacht Club won the regatta. But pretty soon, Gulfport honed their sailing skills. This is a picture from the newspaper. That's Atwood Harding. She was the first Gulfport Yacht Club member to ever win a trophy in the Gulf Yachting Association in the fish boats. And some of you might remember her. I do. She became Miss Bolton, and she worked over here at the GRC for years. I remember her very well. She was quite a sailor. Then in the 1940s, things were moving along well. Club membership was up to 400. We were having a reputation for winning regattas. Skipperettes became very active. They were the female sailors. Now we have the ladies auxiliary. Skipperettes is something that's kind of politically incorrect now. But back then, most of them were sailors. And they had rummage sales, bingo, bridge parties, informal dances on Thursday night, pool, ping pong, checkers, domino, chess, and tea dances on Sunday to raise money for various projects. But as you can see, there wasn't a lot to do in Gulfport at that time. Then, of course, the war came. And on the 20th of July, 1940, the Coast Guard took control of the clubhouse. They did pay $1,800 for use of the club, and they occupied it until 1946. However, the club held together and remained somewhat active during the war. Of course, most of the younger sailors were off, and there's a Commodore, who was George P. Hopkins Sr. at that time in 1941, sent out a note to the membership saying it's more important than ever that every one of us remaining at home give his wholehearted cooperation and support to the end that the club shall not fail in its duty to the community. And it didn't. It worked with USO. It had dances and social functions and included the military people that were stationed here at the time. In addition to all the guys from here that went out, they saw to it that they had membership cards so they could use facilities of the other yacht clubs in various places around the world where they were stationed. After the war, got the club back. Dues were $24, and there was a lot of celebration parties. They were thrilled to get back in the club. The first party was a luau, which started a tradition. The club still has an annual luau every year. We got some interesting pictures. Fred Urey, the mayor's father, got captured and tied to a stake at the luau where he was supposed to be burned. Also, the first regatta they had after the war, it's noted that Mayor Joseph Milner was the judge. And then, sadly, by the way, this was Miss Gulfport Yacht Club, Marty D. Hopkins. And this is a brochure that was put out by the club. It was kind of the program for the weekend of the dedication. I've got a copy of it here that any of you can look at afterwards if you're interested. The death of Dr. Hopkins at that time, which was a big blow to the club. Apparently he was a very dynamic man, and they established this trophy, which we still sail for, in his memory. They also got back to their social, this was one of the parties they had down there in the old club. And I can't identify all these people, but I'm sure there's some in this room that can identify a lot of them. Then, of course, on the 17th of September 1947, hurricane came, washed the whole thing away. The only thing left standing was the flag mast that had been given to the club by Mr. Albert Fant from the Creosote Company, and that was all we had left. So in the years from 1947 to 1950, the yacht club was loaned, and they moved on site an old latrine from the Navy base, and that served as the clubhouse during that time. In 1948, Gulfport hosted the International Star Class Spring Championship for the Western Hemisphere. This brought people from all of South and Central America, Cuba, Canada, and all of North America to sail in this event. And of course, we had no club but an outhouse. But the Janke family from New Orleans brought over their houseboat. It was tied up over where the launching ramp is now in the harbor. And we've even got some moving pictures of this. The opening ceremonies with the Gulfport High Band marching in. The military did the flag raising ceremony on top of it. It was a great success, even without a club. In fact, the trophies were displayed in Cuba's jewelry store during the whole time. And aside, when I was stationed at Annapolis in the Navy, I had a sailboat. I sailed across the Chesapeake one weekend to a little town, beautiful little town called Oxford. And they had a yacht club there, and it was Sunday evening. I was filthy, dirty, and tired, and I went in, and they were just locking up the club. And I needed a shower, something terrible. And I introduced myself, and I told the man I was from Gulfport, Mississippi. And he said, Gulfport, Mississippi? He said, I sail my starboat down there. It was in this regatta. He said, I had the best time I've ever had in my life. The people were so wonderful. Here, take the key, use the club for whatever you need. Anybody from Gulfport's always more than welcome here. Then, by miracle, the next year, 1948, our team of sailors won the Lipton Regatta. It was the first, and to this date, the only time we've ever won it. The skippers for us were Tut Alfonso, Dr. Guy Lewis, Dickie Matthews, and Dick Gay. And they came home with this gorgeous trophy, and we had no place to display it because we had no club. So it again was displayed in the vault at Huber's for a year when it was in our possession. Then in May of 1950, they rebuilt the clubhouse, and Commodore at that time was Mr. R.L. Heath, where he said, despite the war years and loss of our club facilities because of 47 Hurricane, we have found no slacking in interest in the high point of club activities, which is true. Then, finally in 1958, they culminated the plans to build a club that was private that belonged to the club. This was done across the harbor over on land on East Pier. It actually belonged to the IC Railroad, and it was a very complicated thing. The city leased the property from the IC Railroad and in turn leased it to the Yacht Club for $10 a year. The Commodore at that time was F.B. Hughes Jr., who pointed out in the newspaper that the new club was a civic venture not built for only a few ardent yachtsmen and women. It's for the people of Gulfport. Then the pool was added in 1960. It was opened on 4th of July weekend, and they logged 800 registered people to swim in the pool over that 3-day weekend. I hope one of them wasn't me. Then, of course, 1969, Hurricane Camille, and that's what we had left. But shortly after the hurricane, Mayor Philip Shaw contacted Commodore Only Raines and urged the club to renew the lease on this property in hopes to encourage us to build back, which of course we did. They put a trailer down there. In the meantime, people could go by, and the bartender was kind of the manager of the trailer. He had a little window. You could call up and say, I want a gin and tonic, and you'd pull up there on your way home, and he'd shove one out. That was our club. Then finally, the new club was opened on July 9, 1971. Then in 1983, we had probably the biggest event we've ever had here in Gulfport with sailing. It was the National Laser and World Championship. It lasted about 3 weeks. It was quite an effort, but Gulfport came through and did well. There were over 150 participants from 35 countries involved, and listed are the names of 60 local businesses that participated in some way, either financially or in kind. Then another interesting international race we had was a race from La Rochelle, France to Gulfport. And that was quite a boom to the club because they were here. It took about 10 days to finish this race because the boats got so spread out between across the Atlantic to here. And this is what graced our yacht club for these 10 days, and men quit going home for lunch. In 2005, $2 million worth of renovations were done on the club. A new pool. The old pool was the original one. It survived Hurricane Camille. And $2 million was spent to renovate the club, which we got to use for about 4 months, and it looked like that. Again, we went a double wide, but in 2008, we opened our new club, and it was one of the first things to come back on the beach. And that's pretty much the story of the Yacht Club and a lot of the story of Gulfport. Well, do need to give credit to Joe Alfonso. He was a long-time historian of the club. He collected all our artifacts. He built a room on his home to store them in. The only problem is he left them in my hands. We have the same problem as you. We have no place to put them right now. They're in storage. But it's really quite an archive. This is just a sampling. And anybody wants to can come up and look. I've told you what these are. This is a membership card from 1937. And it's what you can see here. This is a photocopy of the back. It was on Dr. Oliver Hopkins' private calling card. And here you have this is just a sample. I mean, a small sample of what we've got there. This was in conjunction with a Jones Park event, a newspaper things, and this is a scrapbook from 1938 that someone compiled. And you can see in the newspaper, everything that went on the Yacht Club was a big deal back then. It's just loaded with newspaper articles from then. In conjunction with this anniversary, we put together a book of the history of the Yacht Club, and we're very proud of it. And I want to present a copy of our book to the Gulfport Historical Society.
Oh, thank you.
No place to put. Anyone that's interested, this is just a fraction of what's in the book. And Ed German gets a lot of credit. We used a lot of his photographs. We do have these for sale at the Yacht Club for cost. I think it's $35 or something if anyone's interested in that. You can go down to the office and purchase one. Thank you all.
Right. Thank you so much. I'll just read his inscription.